The auditorium buzzed with whispers, a hive of judgment ready to sting. James Carter, 40, stood at the back, his calloused hands stuffed into his jacket pockets, feeling every smirk aimed his way. They called him the rented dad, a nobody who'd swooped into Ethan's life like a vulture circling a lost kid. He wasn't Ethan's real father. That much was true. Ethan's biological dad, a corporate hotshot named Richard, had vanished when Ethan was 10, leaving behind a string of broken promises and a kid who cried himself to sleep. James met Ethan's mom, Sarah, 2 years ago at a community center grief group. She was a single mom battling cancer. He was a widower trying to piece his life back together after losing his husband, Mark, to a car accident. Their shared pain forged a bond, and when Sarah's health plummeted, James stepped in not just for her, but for Ethan, the scrawny 14-year-old with a quick wit and a guarded heart. Sarah died 6 months ago, and James, against all odds, became Ethan's legal guardian. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Ethan was family now, blood or not. But the town of Willow Creek, a sleepy suburb outside Seattle, wasn't ready for a gay man raising a queer kid. The whispers started at Ethan's high school, where parents and students alike sneered at James's presence at PTA meetings or soccer games. Rented dad. They'd hiss, as if love could be leased like a car. Tonight was Ethan's big moment, the annual student speech competition. At 16, Ethan had poured his heart into a speech about identity, love, and familiar speech James knew would stir the pot in this conservative-leaning town. James scanned the crowd, spotting familiar faces. Mrs. Larson, the PTA president who'd once called him unnatural. Coach Daniels, who'd grumbled about Ethan's rainbow wristband at practice. And Mia, Ethan's best friend, a 17-year-old non-binary artist who sat in the front row, cheering silently with a raised fist. Ethan stepped onto the stage, his lanky frame dwarfed by the spotlight. His dark hair fell into his eyes, but his voice was steady. "Family isn't just blood," he began, and the room hushed. "It's the people who show up when the world walks out." James's chest tightened. He knew Ethan was talking about him. The story of how they got here wasn't simple. When James first met Ethan, the kid was angry, lashing out at everyone. He'd been bullied for being openly queer, for wearing nail polish, for refusing to hide. James saw himself in Ethan, the same defiance he'd had at 16, sneaking out to gay bars in the 90s, dodging punches from bigots. He'd vowed to protect Ethan, but it wasn't easy. The school principal, Mr. Hargrove, had warned James that Ethan's flamboyance was disruptive. James had bitten his tongue, knowing a fight would only make things worse for Ethan. But Ethan wasn't one to back down. Last year, he'd organized a pride event at school, a small booth with rainbow flags and pamphlets. It was a bold move and it drew attention good and bad. A group of seniors, led by a kid named Tyler, had torn down the booth, laughing as they called Ethan slurs. James had found Ethan crying behind the gym, clutching a ripped flag. "They hate me," Ethan had whispered. James knelt beside him, his own heart breaking. "They don't know you," he'd said, "and they don't get to define you." That moment changed something in James. He'd spent years keeping his own identity quiet, blending in to avoid trouble. But Ethan's courage lit a fire in him. He started showing up to school events openly as Ethan's guardian, holding his head high despite the stares. He even wore a rainbow pin to the grocery store, daring anyone to say something. Most didn't, but the whispers followed him like shadows. Tonight, as Ethan spoke, James felt the weight of those shadows lift. Ethan's words were raw, weaving a story of loss: his mom, his dad, his sense of belonging and of finding family in unexpected places. "My dad," Ethan said, pausing to look at James, "didn't have to choose me. He did anyway." The word dad hit James like a freight train. He blinked back tears, his throat tight, but the crowd wasn't all on their side. Mrs. Larson shifted uncomfortably, her lips pursed. Tyler and his friends snickered from the back. James clenched his fists, ready to storm out if they disrupted Ethan's moment. He'd fought too hard for this kid to let anyone ruin it. Ethan's speech built to a crescendo, his voice cracking with emotion. Family is the courage to stand up, even when the world wants you to sit down. The room was silent save for a few gasps. Mia clapped first, then others joined. A slow wave of applause that drowned out the skeptics. James's heart pounded. This was Ethan's victory, but it was his, too. As Ethan stepped off the stage, James met him halfway, pulling him into a hug. "You were incredible," he whispered. Ethan grinned, his eyes shining. "Thanks, Dad." The word again, so simple, so heavy. James knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Willow Creek wasn't done judging them, but for now, they'd won. The auditorium lights dimmed, and the crowd began to disperse. James caught Tyler's eye, expecting a smirk, but the kid looked away, almost ashamed. Maybe Ethan's words had reached him. Maybe not. Either way, James didn't care. He had Ethan, and Ethan had him. That was enough. The next morning, Willow Creek High buzzed with gossip about Ethan's speech. Some kids called it legendary. Others, like Tyler's crew, dismissed it as preachy. James overheard snippets at the diner where he worked as a line cook, the clatter of plates barely drowning out the murmurs. "That gay guy raising the queer kid? Bold move," one customer said, not unkindly. James kept his head down, flipping pancakes, but pride swelled in his chest. Ethan, meanwhile, was riding high. At school, he walked with a new confidence, his rainbow wristband more prominent than ever. Mia, ever loyal, stuck by his side, sketching Ethan's portrait in their art class. "You're famous now," they teased, showing him a sketch of him on stage, his fist raised. Ethan laughed, but his eyes darted nervously to the hallway, where Tyler and his friends loitered. James had worried about retaliation. Tyler's dad, Greg, was a local mechanic with a loud mouth and louder opinions. He'd been at the speech, arms crossed, glaring at James like he'd stolen something. James knew men like Greg, guys who thought love had rules, who saw people like him and Ethan as threats to their tidy world. He'd dealt with them his whole life, from the bullies in his Ohio hometown to the coworkers who'd side-eyed him and Mark. That afternoon, James picked Ethan up from school in his beat-up Ford truck. Ethan slid into the passenger seat, quieter than usual. "You okay?" James asked, glancing over. Ethan shrugged, fiddling with his backpack. "Tyler said some stuff. Called you. You know, the rented dad thing again." James gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles whitening. Ignore him. He's just a kid with too much anger. But Ethan wasn't letting it go. "Why do they care so much? It's not like I'm hurting anyone." His voice cracked, and James felt that familiar ache, the need to shield Ethan from a world that didn't always understand. "They're scared," James said after a pause. "People like Tyler, they lash out when they don't get it. Doesn't make it right, but it's not about you." Ethan nodded, but his silence spoke volumes. James decided to lighten the mood. "Wanna grab ice cream? My treat." Ethan's face lit up. "Only if they've got mint chocolate chip." They drove to Scoops, the local ice cream shop, where Ethan rambled about his speech and his plans for next year's Pride event. James listened, marveling at how this kid, so bruised by life, still shone so bright. Back home, their small rented house felt like a sanctuary. Photos of Sarah and Ethan lined the walls, alongside a few of James and Mark from happier days. Ethan had insisted on keeping Mark's old vinyl records, playing them on a rickety turntable. Tonight, David Bowie's Heroes filled the living room as they ate dinner spaghetti, James's specialty. Ethan twirled his fork, then said, "I'm glad you're here, you know? Mom would have liked you." James nearly choked on his food. "She did," he said softly. "She told me you were the best thing she ever did." Ethan smiled, but his eyes were distant. James knew he was thinking of Sarah, and maybe Richard, too. He wondered if Ethan ever hoped his bio dad would come back. James had looked Richard up. A LinkedIn profile showed him thriving in Chicago. No mention of a son. It made James's blood boil, but he kept it to himself. The next day, trouble brewed. James got a call from Mr. Hargrove, the principal. "We've had a complaint," Hargrove said, his tone clipped. Some parents think Ethan's speech was inappropriate, too political. James's jaw tightened. It was about his life. You gonna tell him he can't talk about who he is? Hargrove sighed. I'm just saying it stirred things up. We're suggesting Ethan tone it down for the next event. James hung up, fuming. When Ethan got home, James told him about the call. Ethan's face fell, but then he straightened up, his eyes blazing. They can't shut me up. I'm doing another speech at the spring assembly. James admired the fire in him, but worry gnawed at his gut. He knew Willow Creek wasn't ready for Ethan's boldness or for him. That evening, James found Ethan in his room, writing furiously in a notebook. New speech? James asked, leaning against the doorframe. Ethan nodded. It's about you, and Mom, and me. He hesitated, then added, I'm gonna tell them what family really means. James's heart swelled, but fear crept in. Ethan was fearless, but fearlessness came with a cost. The next week, rumors spread that Tyler's dad, Greg, was rallying parents to protest Ethan's next speech. James overheard it at the diner, where Greg held court with his buddies, calling Ethan's pride event a circus and James a fraud. James wanted to confront him, but he held back for Ethan's sake. Instead, he focused on supporting Ethan, helping him rehearse his speech, offering feedback on every line. Mia, ever the ally, started a whisper campaign of their own, spreading word about Ethan's next speech through social media. We're gonna pack the auditorium, they told Ethan, their eyes gleaming. Let's show them what family looks like. James felt a spark of hope. Maybe Ethan's words could change hearts, even in Willow Creek. But as the spring assembly approached, tension grew. Someone spray-painted "Freak" on Ethan's locker. James reported it to Hargrove, who promised to investigate but did little. Ethan brushed it off, but James saw the hurt in his eyes. He vowed to stand by Ethan no matter what. The rented dad label stung, but he'd earned their respect not for himself, but for the kid who called him dad. The spray-painted word "freak" lingered in James's mind like a bruise. He scrubbed Ethan's locker himself, the school's janitor standing by uselessly, muttering about kids being kids. Ethan acted tough, shrugging it off with a forced grin, but James saw the way his shoulders slumped when he thought no one was watching. At 16, Ethan was a warrior, but even warriors bled. James doubled down on being there. He drove Ethan to school every morning, blasting Bowie to lift his spirits. He showed up at Ethan's art club, where Mia and a few other kids welcomed him like family. But the town's hostility was growing. Greg's petition to keep politics out of school gained traction, with 50 signatures by week's end. Mrs. Larson, the PTA president, emailed James directly, urging him to consider Ethan's safety and pull him from the spring assembly. James deleted the email, his hands shaking. Ethan, meanwhile, was pouring everything into his new speech. Late at night, James heard him practicing in his room, his voice rising and falling with passion. Family isn't about fitting in, Ethan read aloud one evening, catching James's eye. It's about standing out together. James nodded, his throat tight. He wondered if Ethan knew how much those words meant to him. The spring assembly was 2 weeks away, and tension hung over Willow Creek like a storm cloud. Mia organized a counter-campaign, printing rainbow stickers with the words "Family is love" and passing them out at school. Some kids wore them proudly. Others tossed them in the trash. Tyler's crew predictably escalated things. They cornered Ethan in the cafeteria, knocking his tray to the floor. "Your fake dad can't save you," Tyler sneered. Mia stepped in, shoving Tyler back, and a teacher broke it up before fists flew. Ethan came home that day with a bruise on his arm and a fire in his eyes. James wanted to march to Tyler's house and have words with Greg, but Ethan stopped him. "Don't," he said. "This is my fight too." James relented, but he stayed up late, Googling legal protections for queer kids in schools. He found a local LGBTQ+ advocacy group and reached out, scheduling a meeting with a lawyer named Carla, who promised to help if the school board tried to censor Ethan. Carla, a sharp-witted woman in her 50s, met James and Ethan at a coffee shop. She listened as Ethan explained his speech, her eyes softening. "You're brave," she told him. "But bravery needs backup. If they try to shut you down, we'll push back legally." Ethan grinned, and James felt a flicker of relief. They weren't alone. But the town's resistance wasn't just about Ethan's speech. It was about James, too. At the diner, a coworker named Pete, usually friendly, pulled James aside. "Look, man, I don't care who you love, but you're stirring up trouble. Maybe tone it down for the kids' sake." James stared him down. Tone down being his dad? Not a chance. Pete backed off, but the words stung. James had spent years toning himself down, hiding his relationship with Mark, avoiding PDA, keeping his head low. He was done with that. Ethan, sensing James's frustration, suggested they do something fun to clear their heads. They drove to a nearby lake, skipping stones across the water as the sun set. Ethan opened up about his mom, how she'd always encouraged him to be himself. "She'd love you," Ethan said, tossing a stone. "She always said real family shows up." James smiled, his heart full. "I'm here, kid. Always." The next day, trouble escalated. James got a call from the school. Ethan had been suspended for disrupting class after arguing with a teacher who'd called his speech inappropriate. James stormed to the principal's office, where Hargrove sat behind his desk, looking weary. "Ethan needs to respect boundaries," Hargrove said. James leaned forward, his voice low. "He's a kid telling his truth. You're punishing him for existing." Hargrove promised to lift the suspension if Ethan apologized. James refused. "He's got nothing to apologize for." When Ethan heard, he hugged James tighter than ever. "You're the best," he whispered. James ruffled his hair, hiding his worry. The suspension was a warning shot. Greg and his allies were closing in. That night, James found Ethan rewriting his speech, adding a section about standing up to bullies. "I'm not scared," Ethan said, but his hands trembled as he wrote. Mia, ever the strategist, suggested they film Ethan practicing his speech and post it online. "Let's show them we're not backing down," they said. James hesitated. Going public could escalate things, but Ethan was all in. They recorded the video in the living room, Ethan's voice steady as he spoke about love, loss, and resilience. Mia posted it to Instagram, tagging local queer activists. By morning, it had 500 views and dozens of supportive comments. But not everyone was supportive. Greg showed up at the diner, his face red with anger. "You're brainwashing that kid," he spat at James. "Keep your agenda out of our town." James kept his cool, wiping down the counter. "My agenda is raising a good kid. What's yours?" Greg stormed out, but James knew this wasn't over. As the assembly neared, James and Ethan prepared for battle. Carla helped them draft a letter to the school board, demanding Ethan's right to speak. Mia rallied more students, turning the assembly into a showdown. James felt the weight of it all, the stares, the whispers, the rented dad label, but he looked at Ethan and saw a kid worth fighting for. They'd face the auditorium together, and no one would silence them. The video of Ethan's speech went viral in Willow Creek, racking up thousands of views. Support poured in from strangers, but so did hate. Comments called Ethan a snowflake and James a wannabe dad. James scrolled through them late at night, his stomach churning. Ethan, unfazed, kept tweaking his speech, determined to make it perfect. "They can hate all they want," he told James. "I'm saying what matters." James admired Ethan's grit but worried about the toll. At 16, Ethan was juggling school, grief, and a town that seemed hell-bent on breaking him. James tried to shield him, cooking his favorite meals, taking him to art galleries with Mia. But the hostility was relentless. Someone keyed "fag" into James's truck, the scratches deep and jagged. He didn't tell Ethan, repainting it himself, but the act felt like a violation. Carla, the lawyer, called with good news. The school board had backed down, confirming Ethan could speak at the assembly. But there was a catch. Hargrove insisted on reviewing the speech first. James refused on Ethan's behalf. "It's his voice, not theirs," he told Carla. She agreed but warned that Greg's petition now had 100 signatures, and some parents planned to protest outside the auditorium. Ethan, meanwhile, was thriving in his own way. He and Mia started a queer student alliance, meeting in the art room after school. James dropped by one meeting bringing pizza and was floored by the turnout 15 kids. Some out, some questioning, all drawn to Ethan's courage. One girl, Sophie, a shy 15-year-old, thanked Ethan for making her feel less alone. James watched, proud but aching, knowing how much Ethan carried to inspire others. The night before the assembly, James found Ethan pacing the living room, script in hand. "What if they boo me?" Ethan asked, his voice small. James sat him down. "Some might, but you'll reach someone, even if it's just one kid who needs to hear it." Ethan nodded, then hugged James, his skinny arms tight. "I'm glad you're my dad," he whispered. James's eyes stung. He'd never tire of hearing that word. The morning of the assembly, Willow Creek High was a battlefield. Protesters, mostly parents, led by Greg, stood outside, holding signs, "Keep schools neutral," and "Protect our kids." Counter-protesters, organized by Mia, waved rainbow flags, chanting "Love is love." James parked far from the chaos, guiding Ethan through a side entrance. Ethan clutched his script, his jaw set. "Ready?" James asked. Ethan nodded. "Let's do this." The auditorium was packed, the air thick with tension. James took a seat near the front, next to Carla and Mia. Tyler and his friends sat in the back, smirking. Mrs. Larson was there, too, her face unreadable. Hargrove opened the event with a bland speech about community values, dodging the elephant in the room. Then Ethan stepped up, his sneakers squeaking on the stage. "My name is Ethan Carter," he began, his voice clear, "and I'm here to talk about family." The room stilled. James held his breath, every muscle tense. Ethan's speech was different from the last one, bolder, rawer. He spoke about losing his mom, about his bio dad's abandonment, about finding James. "Family isn't who you're born to," he said. "It's who stays." He paused, scanning the crowd. "Some of you call my dad a rented dad. You think he doesn't belong. But he's been there every day when I was bullied, when I was scared, when I needed him. That's what a dad does." James's heart pounded. He saw Mia wipe away a tear. Carla nod approvingly. Even some parents looked moved, their defenses cracking. But then Tyler heckled, "Get a real dad." A few laughed, but Ethan didn't flinch. "A real dad shows up," he shot back, his voice steady. "Where's yours?" The room gasped, then fell silent. Greg, in the audience, turned red, but Tyler shrank in his seat. Ethan kept going, weaving in stories of other queer kids, of families that didn't fit the mold but loved fiercely anyway. James felt the room shift. Some parents clapped. Others whispered, unsure. Ethan ended with a call to action. "If you've got love in your heart, stand up for it. Don't let fear win." He stepped back, and the auditorium erupted, some cheers, some boos, but mostly applause. Mia leapt up, hugging Ethan as he left the stage. James stood, clapping until his hands hurt. Afterward, people approached Ethan to congratulate, others to argue. Sophie, the shy girl from the Alliance, hugged him, tears streaming. "You made me feel okay," she whispered. James watched, his chest tight with pride. But Greg stormed over, his face a mask of rage. "You're turning this school into a circus," he spat at James. Before James could respond, Ethan stepped in. "It's not a circus. It's my life." Greg faltered, then walked away. James put a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You were unstoppable," he said. Ethan grinned, but his eyes were tired. The fight wasn't over, but they'd won this round. As they left the auditorium, James noticed Tyler lingering, his expression conflicted. Maybe Ethan's words had planted a seed. That night, James and Ethan celebrated with pizza and Bowie. Ethan was quieter, processing the day. "Think they'll ever get it?" he asked. James thought of his own journey, the years it took for his family to accept him. "Some will," he said. "You're showing them how." Ethan smiled, and for the first time in weeks, James felt hope outweigh fear. The The fallout from Ethan's speech rippled through Willow Creek. Social media buzzed with clips, some praising Ethan's courage, others slamming him as divisive. James kept Ethan off his phone, knowing the hate could crush his spirit. At the diner, customers whispered about the gay kid's speech, some with admiration, others with scorn. James ignored them, focusing on his work, but every slur felt like a knife. Ethan, meanwhile, was energized. The Queer Student Alliance grew, with more kids joining, inspired by his words. Sophie, the shy 15-year-old, started speaking up in meetings, sharing her own story of coming out as bi. Mia designed posters for a school pride event, bigger than last year's. Ethan threw himself into planning, but James saw the strain in his eyes. Being a symbol was heavy. One evening, James found Ethan staring at an old photo of Sarah. "She'd be proud, right?" Ethan asked, his voice small. James sat beside him. "She'd be over the moon. You're everything she hoped you'd be." Ethan leaned into him, and James felt the weight of their bond. He wasn't just a guardian. He was Ethan's anchor. But trouble was brewing. Greg filed a formal complaint with the school board, claiming Ethan's speech violated community standards. Hargrove called James in, suggesting Ethan take a break from public speaking. James laughed bitterly. "You mean hide who he is?" Hargrove sighed. "I'm trying to keep the peace." James stood. "Peace doesn't mean silencing my kid." Carla, the lawyer, stepped in, threatening legal action if the school censored Ethan. The board backed off, but Greg's allies didn't. At a PTA meeting, Mrs. Larson proposed a parental oversight committee to review student events like Pride. James attended, his first time at a PTA meeting, and spoke up. "You're not protecting kids by shutting them down," he said, his voice steady. "You're teaching them to hide." A few parents nodded. Others glared. The proposal failed, but the divide deepened. Ethan faced his own battles at school. Tyler's crew upped their harassment, shoving him in the halls, whispering slurs. Ethan held his head high, but James saw the toll. One night, Ethan came home with a split lip, claiming he'd tripped. James didn't buy it. "Who did this?" he demanded. Ethan hesitated, then admitted Tyler had pushed him into a locker. James's blood boiled, but Ethan begged him not to intervene. "I need to handle this," he said. James reluctantly agreed, but kept a closer eye on Ethan. He started volunteering at the school's art club, where Ethan and Mia hung out. The kids welcomed him, and James found himself enjoying their chaotic energy. Sophie showed him her sketches, and he praised her talent, feeling like he was building something bigger than himself, a community. The Pride event was a week away, and Ethan was determined to make it unforgettable. He and Mia planned a talent show, with performances by queer students and allies. James helped build a stage backdrop, his carpentry skills coming in handy. The work grounded him, but he couldn't shake his fear. Greg's petition had grown to 150 signatures, and rumors swirled of a bigger protest. The night before the event, James and Ethan sat on the porch, sharing a rare quiet moment. Ethan opened up about his bio dad, Richard. "I used to think he'd come back," he said. "But you're here and he's not. That's what matters." James's heart ached. He told Ethan about Mark, how they dreamed of starting a family. "You're the family I never thought I'd have," James said. Ethan smiled, his eyes bright with tears. The Pride event arrived, and Willow Creek High's gym was transformed. Rainbow banners hung everywhere, and kids performed. Sophie sang. Mia read poetry. Ethan emceed. James stood at the back, watching proudly. The crowd was mixed, supportive students, wary parents, and a few of Greg's allies, arms crossed. Outside, protesters chanted, but their voices were drowned out by music. Then it happened. Tyler and his friends snuck in, tossing water balloons filled with red paint at the stage. One hit Ethan, soaking his shirt. The gym fell silent. James rushed forward, but Ethan raised a hand, stopping him. Covered in paint, Ethan grabbed the mic. "This is what fear looks like," he said, his voice steady. "But we're not scared." The crowd cheered, and Tyler's crew slunk out, defeated. James helped clean up, his heart swelling with pride. Ethan's resilience was a force of nature. But later, as they drove home, Ethan was quiet. "I'm tired," he admitted. James nodded. "You don't have to fight every day, kid. I've got your back." Ethan smiled faintly, and James knew they'd face whatever came next together. That night, James got a call from Carla. The school board was considering a neutrality policy that could ban pride events. James's stomach dropped. He looked at Ethan, asleep on the couch, and felt a surge of determination. They'd fought too hard to back down now. The rented dad label didn't matter. Ethan was his son, and he'd protect him, no matter the cost. The paint incident at the pride event made local news, painting Ethan as both a hero and a troublemaker. Support for the Queer Student Alliance surged, but so did backlash. Greg's neutrality policy gained traction, with a school board meeting scheduled to vote on it. James knew this was bigger than one event. It was about Ethan's right to exist unapologetically. He and Ethan met with Carla to strategize. She suggested rallying community support before the meeting. "Show them you're not alone," she said. Ethan took the lead, organizing a petition with Mia and Sophie. They collected 200 signatures in 2 days, mostly from students and a few teachers. James was amazed at Ethan's drive, but he saw the exhaustion in his eyes. Being a leader at 16 was a heavy burden. James tried to lighten the load. He took Ethan and Mia to a drag show in Seattle, a rare night of laughter and freedom. Ethan, in glittery eyeliner, danced with Mia, his smile brighter than James had seen in weeks. On the drive home, Ethan said, "I want to keep fighting, but sometimes I just want to be a kid." James gripped the wheel, his heart aching. "You can be both," he said. "I'll handle the grown-up stuff." The school board meeting was a circus. Greg and his allies packed the room, their signs demanding neutral schools. James, Ethan, Mia, and Carla arrived with their supporters, including Sophie's mom, a quiet woman who'd come around after seeing her daughter thrive. Ethan spoke first, his voice steady. "Banning pride doesn't make us neutral. It erases us." His words drew cheers, but Greg shot back, calling Ethan's activism disruptive. James stood, his voice calm but firm. "My son's not the problem. Your fear is." The board deliberated for hours. James sat with Ethan, their hands clasped. When the vote came, the policy failed 4-3. The room erupted, supporters hugging, opponents grumbling. Ethan hugged James, whispering, "We did it." James smiled, but he knew this victory was fragile. Greg's glare as he left promised more fights. Life settled briefly. Ethan focused on school, acing his art class and planning a mural with Mia. James took on extra shifts at the diner to save for Ethan's college fund. But the peace was short-lived. Tyler, humiliated by the pride event, targeted Ethan again. One afternoon, James got a call from Mia. Ethan was in the nurse's office after Tyler tripped him in gym class, spraining his ankle. James rushed to the school, finding Ethan with an ice pack, his face pale. "I'm fine," Ethan insisted, but James saw the fear in his eyes. He confronted Hargrove, who suspended Tyler for a dia slap on the wrist. Furious, James took Ethan home, icing his ankle and cooking his favorite chili. "Why do they hate me so much?" Ethan asked, his voice breaking. James sat beside him. "It's not you. It's their own baggage. You're stronger than they'll ever be." That night, James emailed Carla, asking about restraining orders. She advised documenting every incident, which James started doing meticulously. He also reached out to the queer advocacy group, who offered to host a workshop at school. Ethan jumped at the idea, but Hargrove resisted, citing community concerns. James pushed back, and with Carla's help, the workshop was approved. The workshop was a success, with a queer educator named Alex leading discussions on identity and allyship. Ethan and Mia facilitated, and even Sophie spoke up, her confidence growing. James watched from the back, moved by the kids' courage. But outside, Greg and a few parents picketed, their signs uglier than before. James ignored them, focusing on Ethan's smile as students thanked him. As summer approached, Ethan started planning a community pride festival, bigger than the school event. James helped securing a park permit and recruiting vendors. Mia designed flyers and Sophie's mom baked cookies for the event. The festival drew hundreds, with music, food, and speeches. Ethan spoke briefly, thanking James. "He's not rented," Ethan said, grinning. "He's mine." The crowd cheered, and James blinked back tears. But the festival wasn't without drama. Tyler and his friends showed up, heckling from the sidelines. James kept an eye on them, ready to intervene. When Tyler threw a soda can at Ethan, James stepped in, grabbing Tyler's arm. "Enough," he said, his voice low. Tyler pulled away, but Greg appeared, shoving James. "Stay away from my son," he growled. Before James could respond, Ethan stepped between them. "He's protecting me," Ethan said. "Where were you when Tyler hurt me?" Greg froze, his face conflicted. The crowd watched, tense. Tyler muttered an apology and walked away. Greg followed, silent. James hugged Ethan, whispering, "You're incredible." Ethan smiled, but his eyes were tired. The fight was wearing him down, and James vowed to carry more of it. That night, James and Ethan sat on the couch, exhausted but hopeful. The festival had been a success, and the community was shifting slowly. James knew the rented dad label would linger, but it didn't define him. Ethan was his son, and they'd face every battle together. Summer brought a fragile calm to Willow Creek. The Pride Festival had shifted the town's pulse. More people wore rainbow pins, and the diner's regulars stopped whispering when James walked by. Ethan, now 17, spent his days painting with Mia and planning his senior year. But James knew the peace was temporary. Greg's silence after the festival felt like the quiet before a storm. Ethan's ankle healed, but the emotional scars lingered. He confided in James about nightmares Tyler's face, slurs echoing. James listened, hiding his own rage. He wanted to confront Greg, to demand accountability, but Ethan insisted on handling it himself. "I need to be strong," he said. James nodded, but he started keeping a closer watch, driving Ethan everywhere, checking in with Mia for updates. Carla suggested therapy, and James found a queer-friendly counselor named Dr. Patel. Ethan was skeptical but agreed to try. After a few sessions, he opened up about his mom, his bio dad, and the bullying. Dr. Patel helped him process, and James noticed a change. Ethan laughed more, his shoulders less tense. James started therapy, too, unpacking his grief for Mark and his fears for Ethan. It wasn't easy, but it grounded him. School started, and Ethan threw himself into his senior year. He joined the debate team, using his speech skills to shine. Mia and Sophie rallied the Queer Alliance, planning a fall talent show. James volunteered to build props, earning smiles from the kids. But Tyler's return to school reignited tension. He'd been quieter since the festival, but his friends still targeted Ethan, whispering "rented dad" when James picked him up. One day, James found Ethan crying in his room, a rare crack in his armor. "I'm so tired of fighting," Ethan admitted. James sat beside him, his heart breaking. "You don't have to fight alone," he said. "I'm here." Ethan hugged him, and James felt the weight of their bond stronger than any slur. The talent show was a hit, with Ethan performing a spoken-word piece about resilience. James watched, pride swelling, but noticed Tyler in the audience, his expression unreadable. After the show, Tyler approached Ethan alone. James tensed, ready to intervene, but Tyler muttered, "Good job," and walked away. Ethan looked stunned. "What was that?" he asked Mia. They shrugged, but James saw a glimmer of hope. Maybe Tyler was changing. The school board, however, was another story. Mrs. Larson proposed a new decorum policy, limiting controversial student expressions. It was a veiled attack on the Queer Alliance. James and Carla attended the meeting, where Ethan spoke passionately. "You can't police who we are," he said. The policy failed, but the vote was close 3-4. James knew they dodged a bullet, but more were coming. Ethan's senior year brought new challenges. College applications loomed, and he dreamed of studying art in San Francisco. James supported him, helping with essays, but money was tight. He took on night shifts at the diner, saving every penny. Ethan noticed, insisting on getting a part-time job at Scoops. "We're a team," he told James, who couldn't argue. One evening, James found an old letter from Mark, tucked in a box. It was a love note, written years ago, promising they'd build a family. James cried, realizing he'd fulfilled that promise with Ethan. He showed the letter to Ethan, who read it silently, then hugged him. "Mark would have loved you," Ethan said. James smiled through tears. "He'd have loved you too." As winter approached, Greg resurfaced, organizing a family values rally. James worried it would target Ethan, but Carla had a plan counter with a community event celebrating diversity. Ethan and Mia took charge, planning a winter fair with music, art, and talks. James helped, amazed at their energy. The fair drew a huge crowd, including some of Greg's allies, who seemed curious rather than hostile. But the rally brought trouble. Greg's group marched near the fair, shouting slurs. James kept Ethan close, but Tyler broke ranks, approaching Ethan. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low, "for everything." Ethan stared, then nodded. "Prove it," he said. Tyler walked away, and James wondered if the kid was finally waking up. The fair ended with Ethan's speech, a call for unity. "We're all family," he said, looking at James. The crowd cheered, and James felt hope bloom. But that night, someone slashed his truck's tires. He didn't tell Ethan, not wanting to dim his light. Instead, he focused on the future Ethan's college dreams, their life together. As graduation neared, Ethan started writing his final speech, determined to leave a mark. James helped, offering feedback, but Ethan's vision was clear. "I want them to remember us," he said. James nodded, knowing this speech would be Ethan's legacy and his own. Winter melted into spring, and Ethan's senior year raced toward its climax. His college applications were in, with San Francisco State as his top choice. James scrimped to cover the deposit, proud but anxious about Ethan leaving. The rented dad label still lingered, but Ethan's resilience had shifted Willow Creek. More kids wore rainbow pins, and even some parents softened, thanking James at the diner for Ethan's impact. But Greg's family values group didn't quit. They pushed a new school board proposal to limit extracurricular activism, targeting the Queer Alliance. James and Carla fought back, rallying supporters. Ethan led the charge, organizing a student walkout. On the day of the vote, 100 kids walked out, holding signs, "We are enough." The board shelved the proposal, but Greg vowed to keep fighting. Ethan's final speech was set for graduation, a student-selected speaker slot. He spent weeks crafting it, staying up late, scribbling in his notebook. James read drafts, moved by Ethan's honesty. "This one's for us," Ethan said, his eyes fierce. James nodded, knowing this speech could change everything. Tyler's apology at the fair had sparked rumors. Some said he was questioning his own identity. Others called it a stunt. Ethan was skeptical but open. "If he means it, he'll show it," he told James. One day, Tyler joined the Queer Alliance meeting, sitting quietly. Ethan welcomed him, and James saw a flicker of redemption. Tyler wasn't fixed, but he was trying. The slashed tires weren't the last attack. Someone egged James's house, leaving a note, "Leave." He didn't tell Ethan, cleaning it up before he woke. But Ethan sensed something, asking, "You okay, Dad?" James forced a smile. "Just tired, kid." He hated lying, but Ethan's graduation was too important to overshadow. Carla uncovered that Greg was behind the vandalism, though proof was thin. She advised James to file a police report, which he did, but the case stalled. James focused on Ethan helping with speech rehearsals. Mia and Sophie joined, offering feedback. The Alliance planned a graduation pride display with rainbow sashes for supporters. James sewed them himself, his fingers sore but his heart full. As graduation day neared, tension spiked. Greg's group planned a protest, claiming Ethan's speech would push an agenda. James met with Hargrove, who promised security but urged Ethan to avoid controversy. James laughed. My kid's existence isn't controversial. Hargrove backed off, but James stayed vigilant. The night before graduation, Ethan and James sat on the porch, sharing ice cream. Ethan opened up about his fears leaving for college, losing James. "You're my home," he said. James hugged him. "You'll always have me, no matter where you go." They stayed up late, listening to Bowie, their bond unbreakable. Graduation day arrived, the auditorium packed. James sat with Mia, Sophie, and Carla, his heart pounding. Greg's protesters were outside, but security kept them at bay. Ethan, in his cap and gown, looked radiant, his rainbow sash bold. When he took the stage, the room hushed. "My name is Ethan Carter," he began, his voice strong, "and I'm here to tell you about family." He spoke of his mom's love, his bio dad's absence, and James's unwavering presence. "They called him a rented dad," Ethan said, pausing. "But he's the realest dad I've ever had." James's eyes burned with tears. Ethan's speech wove their story: pain, love, resilience. He called out the bullies, the haters, but also the allies, naming Mia, Sophie, and even Tyler, who sat in the crowd, head bowed. "Family isn't about fitting a mold," Ethan said. "It's about building one together." He ended with a plea: "Choose love over fear." The auditorium erupted. James stood, clapping, tears streaming. Mia and Sophie hugged Ethan as he stepped off, the crowd roaring. Even some of Greg's allies clapped, moved. Tyler approached Ethan, offering a shy handshake. "I meant it," he said. Ethan nodded, a small smile forming. Greg stormed out, his face red. James didn't care. Ethan's words had done what protests couldn't. They'd reached hearts. As they left, strangers thanked Ethan, some crying. Sophie's mom hugged James, saying, "You're a great dad." For the first time, James felt the town shift. That night, they celebrated at Scoops, Ethan's friends toasting his speech. James watched, his heart full. The rented dad label was fading, replaced by something real. Ethan was his son, and they changed Willow Creek, one word at a time. Graduation left Willow Creek buzzing. Ethan's speech trended online, shared by queer activists across the country. Strangers sent letters, thanking him for his courage. But not everyone was happy. Greg's group doubled down, spreading flyers calling for traditional values. James kept them from Ethan, but the tension was palpable. Ethan, now 17, was ready for college. He'd been accepted to San Francisco State, his dream school. James was thrilled but ached at the thought of him leaving. They spent the summer preparing, buying dorm supplies, planning a road trip to California. Ethan was lighter, laughing more, but James saw the weight of the past year in his eyes. Tyler's change was slow but real. He started helping with the Queer Alliance, even apologizing to Sophie for past bullying. Ethan was cautious but forgiving, telling James, "People can change. You taught me that." James nodded, proud but wary. He knew change wasn't universal. Greg hadn't softened. One day, James found a note slipped under their door. "You don't belong." He burned it, not telling Ethan, but the threat lingered. Carla suggested installing security cameras, which James did, his savings dwindling. He didn't care. Ethan's safety came first. Dr. Patel, their therapist, helped them process the stress, reminding James to lean on their community. The Queer Alliance threw a send-off party for Ethan, with Mia and Sophie leading the charge. The gym was filled with balloons, music, and laughter. Tyler showed up, offering Ethan a sketchbook as a gift. "For college," he said awkwardly. Ethan smiled, accepting it. James watched, amazed at how far they'd come. But the night before Ethan's move, trouble struck. Someone smashed their mailbox, leaving a brick with "freak" scrawled on it. James called the police, who took a report but offered little hope. Ethan saw the damage and hugged James, his voice steady. "They can't break us." James nodded, but fear gnawed at him. He stayed up all night watching the cameras. The road trip to San Francisco was bittersweet. They drove through mountains and deserts, singing to Bowie, sharing stories. Ethan talked about his dreams, becoming an artist, advocating for queer kids. James shared memories of Mark, how they'd planned to adopt. "You're my family now," he told Ethan, who grinned. "Always." In San Francisco, they set up Ethan's dorm, meeting his roommate, a queer kid named Leo. James felt a pang, leaving Ethan, but Leo's warmth eased his worry. As they said goodbye, Ethan hugged him tightly. "You're the best dad," he whispered. James drove home, tears blurring the road, but his heart was full. Back in Willow Creek, James faced an empty house. He kept busy working at the diner, volunteering with the Queer Alliance. Mia and Sophie kept him updated on Ethan, who was thriving in college. He called every week, sharing stories of art classes and new friends. James sent care packages, including Mark's old records. Greg's group quieted, but the vandalism continued. Tires, more notes. James documented everything, working with Carla to build a case. One day, he caught Tyler's dad on camera, tossing a rock through their window. The police arrested Greg, and though he was released on bail, the community turned. Parents who'd supported him distanced themselves, ashamed. Ethan came home for winter break, his confidence radiant. He joined a campus queer group, painting murals for Pride events. James showed him the security footage, and Ethan shook his head. "He's pathetic," he said. They spent the break rebuilding, fixing the window, painting the mailbox with rainbows. Mia and Sophie joined, turning it into a party. As spring approached, Ethan planned a final high school speech for the Queer Alliance's anniversary. He'd be a guest speaker, returning to Willow Creek. James helped him prepare, proud but nervous. The town had changed, but scars remained. Ethan's speech was bold, calling for love to triumph over hate. "We're not just surviving," he wrote. "We're thriving." The event was packed, with students, parents, and even some of Greg's former allies. Tyler sat in the front, clapping loudly. Ethan took the stage, his voice steady, recounting their journey, James's love, the town's resistance, their resilience. "Family is who fights for you," he said, looking at James. The room cheered, and James cried, unashamed. Greg didn't show, but his absence spoke volumes. Willow Creek was healing slowly. James knew the rented dad label would linger for some, but it didn't matter. Ethan was his son, and they'd built something unbreakable. Ethan's return to Willow Creek for the Queer Alliance anniversary was a triumph. The gym, decked in rainbows, felt like a homecoming. James stood at the back, watching Ethan command the stage. At 17, he was a force, confident, articulate, unapologetic. His speech wove their story, grief, love, defiance into a call for change. "We don't just want acceptance," Ethan said. "We want celebration." The crowd roared, even those who'd once whispered, "Rented dad." Tyler, now a regular at Alliance meetings, led the applause. Sophie, no longer shy, hugged Ethan after, her by flag pin gleaming. Mia, ever the artist, gifted Ethan a portrait of him and James, their bond captured in vibrant strokes. James wiped tears, overwhelmed. Greg's arrest had shifted the town. His allies scattered, and the family values group fizzled. The school board, chastened, approved a permanent Pride event. Hargrove retired, replaced by a principal who wore a rainbow lanyard. James felt the change, fewer stares at the diner, more nods of respect. But he stayed vigilant, knowing hate didn't vanish overnight. Ethan's college life thrived. He Skyped James weekly, showing off murals and new friends. James visited San Francisco, meeting Leo and Ethan's queer community. They toured art galleries, and Ethan introduced James as "my dad." No hesitation. James's heart swelled, the rented label a distant memory. Back home, James kept the Queer Alliance going, mentoring kids like Sophie. He started a scholarship fund in Sarah's name, helping queer students like Ethan. Mia won the first award, heading to art school. Tyler, too, was changing, volunteering at the Alliance, even coming out as questioning. James guided him, remembering his own journey. One day, a letter arrived from Richard, Ethan's bio dad. He'd seen Ethan's speech online, wanted to reconnect. Ethan read it, then handed it to James. "He doesn't get to waltz back in," Ethan said. James nodded. Your call, kid. Ethan tore the letter up, choosing the family he'd built. The vandalism stopped and Greg moved away, his influence gone. Willow Creek wasn't perfect, but it was healing. James and Ethan hosted a barbecue, inviting the Alliance kids. Laughter filled their rainbow-painted mailbox, a symbol of their resilience. Ethan, home for summer, raised a glass. To family, he said, looking at James. As Ethan's sophomore year loomed, James knew their bond would endure. The rented dad label was gone, replaced by love that silenced hate. Ethan's speeches had changed hearts, starting with James's own. They'd fought, loved, and won together. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.